Delaware. Thank you for your thank you for your flexibility. I know we changed the location on you, but I think it's much cooler in here, so we appreciate your flexibility. We're in for a real treat. I don't know if you've seen the Citizen Artist exhibition yet at the Delaware Art Museum. I've been 3 or 4 times now, and I'm definitely going to go back. It's really magnificent, and it is such an honor that we have these speakers here with us tonight. So let me just jump into those introductions, and also want to thank all the people who helped with the tech just now, David and Pat and Mike and Peter. Thank you so much, everybody. Ben, thank you. And Jen, thanks for moving us into this floor space as well. So thank you. Okay, so tonight we have Margaret Winslow, who is the head curator and curator of contemporary art at the Delaware Art Museum. She has curated for the Newburgh Museum of Art and the Delaware Contemporary and assisted with exhibits for the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum. Margaret holds a BA in art history from the University of Mary Washington and an MA in modern and contemporary art, theory and criticism from SUNY Purchase College. And we have Dorothy Lewis Fisher, a PhD candidate at the University of Delaware, has been a Lynn Herrick Sharp Curatorial Fellow at the Delaware Art Museum since September 2023. She holds a BA in art history from St. Mary's College of Maryland and an MA in art history from both the University of Delaware and the Courtauld Institute of Art. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dorothy and Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us this evening. I can't tell you how excited we are to share Citizen Artist with you. As you can see, the exhibition opened in the middle of April, and you have plenty of time to go visit the Delaware Art Museum, where it is on view through the middle of July. Citizen Artist highlights diverse artists who are working for America during the Depression era decades of the 1930s and 40s into the federally funded initiatives of the 1970s. The New Deal and the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, or CETA, we will refer to it as CETA throughout our talk, were catalysts here in Delaware and across the entire nation. And in many ways, they shaped the artistic and cultural landscape that we have today. Citizen Artists is very much about a reciprocal relationship between artists and communities. And by putting artists in libraries, in your local museums, in dark rooms, they transformed and are a result of the legacies that we have today. So this exhibition is very much about celebrating artists very intentionally in 2026 as historians, as storytellers, as the people who are documenting our shared experience. We also celebrate them as visionaries in this moment during the semi-quincentennial. And I have a very good one for you. Thank you very much.
Before we get into the weeds here, and there are a lot of weeds, I just want to say that you guys all have to go and see Citizen Artist in person. There are over 200 objects in the show. We should have aimed for 250, but the registrars would have killed us. We're going to tell you a lot of things about this exhibition, but there are so many more stories that it's not going to be possible to touch on. And it's so exciting to share them today in Arden, which is one of Delaware's most important and historic artistic communities. So this is a story that is for us as Delawareans, as artists, as cultural people that are interested in culture. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys. So our story begins with the Wall Street crash of 1929, which sparked the largest economic downturn in American history. Franklin Roosevelt's campaign for president in 1932 promised the nation a New Deal to answer unemployment rates that had reached 25% by the time of his inauguration. In the Great Recession in 2008, unemployment hit like 11%. So just as, scale. While the New Deal meant new jobs for skilled workers through an alphabet soup of new relief programs, artists were left out of the initial platform that elected FDR. He was not running on a jobs for artists platform. The collaboration of professional artists was ultimately critical to the success of the New Deal, but their inclusion followed advocacy from the artists themselves. Between 1933 and 1942, graphic designers published new programs designed to combat the suffering captured by photographers. Prestigious artists competed to create murals for new public buildings. Writers and artists created educational materials for children and adults. Artists supported artists to work for the public and impacted all areas of American life on a scale that's almost unimaginable. 40,000 artists. So many of these artists also are teachers. We have some really great works of art to show you that I'll continue to talk about, but so many of the artists are artists that don't necessarily leave great paintings or great works of art because their work is in the classroom. And I think it's really important to kind of hold space for those artists also. So the Delaware Art Museum is also at the heart of this story, which is pretty fun, but that's because of the legacy of the Public Works of Art project. So in 1932, at the lowest point of the Depression, the harsh winter of 1932, the College Art Association in New York City hired 100 out-of-work artists to teach classes and decorate buildings for New York City. In the wake of this successful pilot program, the Unemployed Artists Groups, which renamed itself the Artists Union later, and painter George Biddle, who's a childhood friend of FDR, appealed to New Deal administrators and FDR himself. And they called for artists to be treated as professionals, qualified to contribute to the public through federal work relief. Between 1933 and 1934, the Public Works of Art project expanded across the country with the help of local artist administrators. It only works because there are people on the ground who are artists who understand the stakes and understand what they have to do. Under the leadership of artist and Howard Pyle student John Schoonover, Delaware artists received craftsmen's wages to produce original artworks for public use. When the Public Works of Art project ended in 1934, administrators in Philadelphia allocated works by Delaware and Philadelphia artists to the Wilmington Society of Fine Arts, now the Delaware Art Museum. So these works have been part of the Delaware Art Museum's collection for longer than the Delaware Art Museum has had a building. It's very exciting to be able to show them all to you and together now. The Public Works of Art project charged its artists with depicting the American scene in all its phases. I think if we consider that phrase for a moment, there's many, many things that could possibly fit that bill. Many administrators for New Deal art programs favored historical subjects they saw as uncontroversial and easy for viewers to understand. But in practice, you can't box in artists like that. Artists responded to all aspects of contemporary life using a wide variety of contemporary styles. The thousands of artists working for the Public Works of Art project and the easel divisions of the Federal Art Project created an enormous body of work defined by its pluralism, not its homogeneity. Some of these artists took on the widespread urban and rural poverty worsened by the Great Depression. Others considered the industry and infrastructure, from factories to postal services, that animated America. Still more explored abstraction imported by European immigrants, laying the groundwork for the advent of abstract expressionism in the post-war period. Though their work was not without controversy, New Deal artists experienced public support for their freedom of expression as a core American value, a sharp contrast to the increasingly restricted cultural environments in fascist Europe. This is something that the artists talk about, that they really understood themselves as operating in a context of freedom of expression. With two works on screen, and this is one of my favorite pairs of objects in the whole show. We have on the left Edward Loper Sr.'s Taking Down Clothes, which is actually reproduced by Alan Locke in the 1940 edition of The Negro in Art. Alan Locke identifies that Edward Loper Sr., like many young African-American artists in the country had been given his first big chance through the Federal Art Project. This project was incubating young artists at scale, artists from backgrounds who had never would have been able to become professional working artists before. On the right, we see Paul Cadmus's Greenwich Village cafeteria, which is my favorite interpretation of the phrase American scene, because I think a late night bar full of weirdos is a very American scene. Federal Art Project print workshops, like the New York City's Graphic Arts Division, significantly expanded opportunities for women and people of color to become professional artists. The easel painters of the Federal Art Project do skew mostly, kind of white male. But when you look at the entire Federal Art Project, the graphics divisions, and particularly, the graphics divisions are giving women and people of color opportunities on a completely unimaginable scale. Artists from marginalized communities, Indigenous and immigrants alike, found unprecedented support for their work in the steady paychecks of the Federal Art Project. They created collaborative workplaces led by master printers that were dynamic sites of intergenerational creative exchange. That's one of the real themes at the heart of citizen artists, this moment of the power of intergenerational creative exchange. Federal Art Project artists produced their own fine art prints as well as posters that supported New Deal projects and public health priorities. You can see this is for vaccination against whooping cough. Many of these themes are a little too familiar, I think. Many of those artists saw this low-cost printmaking as a form of fine art accessible to regular Americans. Others celebrated the medium's populist political roots in cartoons and newspaper broadsides. Their multicultural regionalism and the work they produce remains a testament to the cultural democracy the Federal Art Project was designed to promote. The Treasury Relief Art Project and the Treasury section of painting and sculpture, you don't have to keep track of all that, commissioned original artworks for new and existing federal buildings across the country. Murals are such a big story of what we remember of the WPA, of the art of the New Deal, these murals that exist in post offices and hospitals and all sorts of public buildings. These the work relief programs of the Work Progress Administration Federal Art Project prioritize the employment of as many individuals as possible, not necessarily the quality of the final output. But the Treasury-run programs prioritized the quality of the final output. The Treasury Department expected its artists to maintain the highest aesthetic standards, and they held competitions to solicit the participation from prestigious artists across the nation. To ensure success and avoid public controversy, these participating artists submitted plans for approval by local stakeholders, as well as Treasury leadership in Washington. And some artists bristled at the input of local postmasters and federal administrators in their creative process. But their participation greatly expanded access to American art through these new public spaces of the New Deal. We are so excited to have on view 3 really exciting mural studies, 2 of which I've blown up for you, and one of which you'll just have to go see in person. But on the left, we have Arshil Gorky's mural study for a series he did at Newark Airport, the newly built Newark Airport. And Gorky believed that traditional forms of representation had sort of failed culture. And so we needed to find something new. This abstraction was a futuristic mode for him, and he's making it for an airport, a brand new airport, which in like 1935 or whatever is the most futuristic possible building. Amazing. And on the right, on the bottom here, we see John Sloan's study for the mail arriving in Bronxville. John Sloan did a mural for the post office in Bronxville, New York. It's still up there. And that is also had long been a part of the Delaware Art Museum's collection because of their association with the estate of John Sloan. And so it was a big part of this process was the very fun and exciting experience of discovering how much of this history is right under our own noses if you know to look for it. The final mural study is by Ben Sean for his Social Security mural, and it's exceptional, but you can't really see it in that little picture, so you'll have to go see it in person. I am so excited to tell you guys about the performing arts in the New Deal, because this is where Arden becomes the kind of star of the show. Federal music and theater programs were an important emotional outlet for the nation during the Depression. Free and cheap performances and public radio broadcasts brought music and theater to the masses. They lightened the country's mood and put actors and musicians back to work. Though most New Deal programs were racially segregated, all-Black Federal Theater Project cast stage productions that addressed contemporary prejudice head-on. There was a production of Macbeth that was set in Haiti, I think directed by Orson Welles, like the mind reels. In Wilmington, an incubator of jazz, the Federal Music Project Negro Dance Orchestra provided inexpensive access to popular live music at concerts and private dances. They broadcast on the radio. It seems like it was a really hot ticket. We got a picture of those guys. That was really hard to find. In major cities, federal theater productions assembled huge casts of out-of-work actors for living newspaper productions. That's the hire as many people as possible sort of ethos that addressed contemporary inequality and put voice to public concerns about the creeping spread of fascism throughout Europe. In Delaware, these concerns were filtered through clever revivals of the classics, including particularly a 1937 production of Julius Caesar in modern clothes. This production was put on by a man named Robert Schnitzer, who was the manager of the Arden Summer Theater before the Federal Theater. When Federal Theater came to Wilmington, which, by the way, you can all read about in the director of the Federal Theater Project was named Hallie Flanagan. She wrote a book called Arena about the history of Federal Theater, and very readable, very fun. But there's a whole little section where she talks about the Delaware Theater Project, because she's like, I didn't even think that we had enough actors to put on it. Like, why bother putting on a Delaware Theater Project? But there were enough professional actors because of the Arden Summer Theater. And so they created this Federal Theater Project. The first thing they did was a production called The Class of 29, about the young people that graduated into the Great Depression. But then the next year, they did this production of Julius Caesar, and we have a program from it in the show. They were wearing ROTC uniform, like uniforms borrowed from the ROTC at UD. And styled as to match this like fascist Europe. And so there was a really direct equivalence between, and they're writing in the newspaper, there's like, he looked just like Mussolini. And that's not like weird anti-Italian racism. That's Mussolini himself is very specifically invoking Julius Caesar as he's in like giving speeches and positioning himself as the leader. He is, when I was doing this research, I'm getting like false positives in the newspaper archives because I'm searching for Julius Caesar, and I'm getting all these weird Mussolini speeches also. So this is not something that like, you don't have to work that hard. But Robert Schnitzer figured out that you could put on this production of Julius Caesar and really kind of advance a narrative, make people think properly. Anyway, he ends up actually working for, he ends up going to Washington to work for Hallie Flanagan directly, and ends up eventually, in 1939, they cancel the Federal Theater Project because they're all supposed to be communists or whatever. They're not, well, some of them are, but, they're not trying to overthrow the government. So the Federal Theater Project is abolished by Congress in 1939. Schnitzer ends up having a really interesting rest of his career. If you Google him, you can find like a YouTube video that he gave where talking about his experiences in the Federal Theater. But I have another Arden name on my list here, which is actually Buzz Ware. So it's amazing that we're here now. He actually went to San Francisco as the art director for the Federal Housing Administration displays in the Golden Gate Exposition of 1937 or 1939. So that's just a fun fact, but isn't that marvelous that we're here, here right now? You can also see some really crazy puppets if you come to see the show. These puppets were produced by Pennsylvania Museum Extension Project workers as part of they're like a whole educational marionette thing that's happening in this moment. This deeply terrifying egg is, and I haven't even shown you guys the tooth nerve. The egg is from a play about childhood nutrition. He had a friend who was like a tomato and a carrot, and they're enemies with a cucumber for some reason. But best not to, But you're thinking about like how are artists creating materials for childhood nutrition and like children's education, and so much of the we might kind of look at this and be like, well, that's very alarming, and I wouldn't show it to a child today. But the kind of underlying pedagogy and the underlying impulse is still sound. And I think that there's something really remarkable and wonderful there. Anyway. So I also think it's important to celebrate the Delaware painter Jack Lewis, who is one of a small handful of artists known to be associated with an outpost of the Civilian Conservation Corps. Developed during the New Deal to employ out-of-work young people, the Civilian Conservation Corps, also called Roosevelt's Tree Army, they undertook projects designed to preserve and develop the natural landscape. So they lived and worked at military-style, gender and racially segregated camps, and they replanted depleted forests, they dug drainage ditches, they built park infrastructure, visitor resources, and they did this in Delaware, particularly Trap Pond State Park and Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuge. Both have were basically developed by the Civilian Conservation Corps workers. And they had an artist because the Delaware CCC workers were led by Colonel Wilbur S. Corcoran, who was the spouse of Rehoboth Art League founder Louise Chambers Corcoran. So he understood that artists have value and can, something to bring to the whole situation, that there is a reason to have an artist on board, even though the federal administration of the Civilian Conservation Corps did not call for make sure you've got an artist hanging around. But Corcoran hired Jack Lewis to document the work and camp lives of the CCC participants. So as artist enrollee, he took on many jobs. He made pictures. We have one of his really lovely gouache paintings of the CCC camps. And I love that you can see the kind of orderly style of living that people are adopting there, but you also see the very sandy lower Delaware soil. This is not like Allegheny National Forest where they're replanting hemlock trees or whatever. This is sandy lower Delaware. But he also created theater sets. He made weird puppets. You can see one of those weird puppets for productions that are being put on for entertainment by the CCC workers themselves. It's even in cases where there are no artists, there's not really supposed to be any artists there. There are, and there is work for them to do because those boys need entertainment. And so they put on plays for themselves. And in the course of that, they need scenery. So you get the artist to do the scenes. And it's amazing there was demand for an artist, even when that was not necessarily what was supposed to be going on. But another sort of the last really key piece of New Deal sort of visual heritage that we have to celebrate with you guys is the legacy of the Farm Security Administration. And many of these photographs you may recognize, certainly, many photographers' names you may recognize. And that's the Farm Security Administration, which was an organization or a government agency that was designed to help combat the effects of the Dust Bowl and the general instability of American agriculture in the 1930s, where it's not just that you have environmental upheaval, hottest summers on record, dust storms, winters, crazy winters, flooding all the time, but you also have the advent of mechanization and mechanized farm tools. So it's the labor relations are completely destabilized. And so no longer needed to work in dried out fields, these so-called Okies abandoned their homes and left for the promise of work and better lives in California, where they often found conditions were literally better than the ones they had just left. The migratory farm workers found clean quarters and running water in New Deal relief camps and planned communities built by the Resettlement Administration, which later becomes the Farm Security Administration. But we know about these pictures because of the historical division of the Farm Security Administration. Professional photographers working for this division, they documented the rural poverty that the New Deal programs were designed to address. The photographs circulated in newspapers and exhibitions as resources for and about the American people. The images like Migrant Mother by Dorothy Lang made immediate impacts, guiding aid to needy communities. In the week, it was less than a week after Dorothy Lang turns in Migrant Mother to her boss. It is in the pages of the San Francisco Chronicle discussing the conditions in the camp in Nipomo where this woman is. And in less than 6 months, it's on the New York Times. It's in the New York Times. It's recirculating also in camera magazines. It's moving around both as a news picture and an art picture almost immediately. And it keeps moving. It keeps getting recirculated in exhibitions and books and publications. And these pictures become American icons. And even when the rest of the WPA there is associated with communism and kind of there's a cultural withdrawal from all of that production, these pictures are still moving around. And they become part of the bedrock of American culture. And several decades later, that ends up coming into play, as Margaret will tell you. Yes.
Oh, apologies.
Right.
Yeah.
Backwards.
There we go. It's okay. I can wing it anyway. So as Dorothy says, we're fast forwarding in time to the 1970s, and that history of the New Deal is absolutely present. So when Richard Nixon signs the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act in December of 1973, he enacts the largest investment in the American worker since the New Deal. Now, it's very different. CETA was not created to support artists. And unlike what George Biddle was able to do with FDR and incorporating artists into that New Deal programming, at no point in the CETA legislation were artists named. However, CETA, unlike the New Deal, was a decentralized program. That meant that local elected officials had the power to create jobs directly in their communities by issuing grants. Artists, of course, realizing that they, like many of the people who are benefiting from CETA, were habitually under and unemployed, were able to align that funding with programs that activated their skills in the service of the American public. Now, CETA's alignment with the arts and its potential for the arts was first identified by John Kreidler. He was, and he's still living, he shares extensively about the CETA history. He was an intern with San Francisco Art Commission's Neighborhood Arts Program. He also studied the New Deal. And so when he proposed to employ 25 artists with CETA funds, that proposal went to his direct boss, who was a former WPA employee. Those 25 artists were hired in December of 1974. and the idea that artists could benefit from this massive jobs program came together. Dorothy and I say that between 73 and 82, conservatively, 20,000 artists and arts administrators were funded. They conceived, they implemented, they directed countless programs in rural, suburban, and urban America. We say conservatively, and we believe because the reality of CETA being a decentralized program means that we don't know everything, or we don't know as much about this program that we wanted to, and that we'd like to, and we hope it continues to evolve and to come forward, this history coming forward. If you go to the National Archives and to DC, you can see all those lists of WPA funded artists. There was no centralized reporting effort or centralized repository where all those names of CETA artists are going back to one easy place. So instead, the research is continuing to develop over time, and we'll share a few of the entities that are doing some of that work to rediscover and to thoroughly document CETA history. So because CETA was decentralized and so focused on the unique needs of the communities in which the funding was allotted, in the CETA section, we look at several case studies. So we look at specific communities where those CETA funds had a tremendous effort. And we start up in Buffalo. So we're up in Western New York, and we're in a community where there are a lot of artists and there are a lot of art students. So thanks to the State University of Buffalo and Buffalo State University College, as well as the Albright Knox Gallery is up in Buffalo. You have Art Park. This is a hub and a space for experimentation artistically. And the artists in those spaces took advantage of it. So in Buffalo, an entity, Hall Walls, which still exists today, used their CETA funding to employ artists who were creating some of the most interesting, innovative, experimental programming. They're inviting curators and scholars, Richard Serra, Lucy Lepard, Willoughby Sharp, some of the most interesting and innovative minds of that time. And it creates an environment and a culture at Hall Walls where artists like Robert Longo, Cindy Sherman, Charlie Clough, their careers are being developed and supported through the CETA funding. The other organization that we focus on, and I should have pointed out, we have Charlie Clough's work there on the far left. You have to see the piece in person because it is showing the front of 30 Essex Street, where Hall Walls was located at the time. On the right, we have a great example from Portrait of Delaware, and Portrait of Buffalo. There might have been a Portrait of Delaware too. Portrait of Buffalo, SEPA, which is an organization that still exists today, the Center for Exploratory and Perceptual Arts, used their CETA funding to document the city. They hired photographers to document it in interesting and innovative ways. So that's how you have an example on the right by Peggy Brady. This is actually a photo diorama. This is a three-dimensional object. We have several works by her, and she's finding a new and interesting way to capture the city around her. You see on the far left a very small image of those dioramas, and on the right, the photographs that Charlie Clough is creating. He's cutting up contact sheets and documenting his city by inviting the viewer to visually move through the landscape. So he takes you on a kind of walking photograph of his Buffalo. Next, we go down to New York. New York City had the largest CETA program. It, over the course of 2 years, employed over 500 artists across all 5 boroughs. The program was overseen by the Cultural Council Foundation. They're working with other programmatic partners across the city. And because it came online much later in CETA's history, it does not come online until 1978. But over the course of those 2 years, it creates an almost innumerable programs, whether it's art installations in public spaces. We have the Orchestra of New York that it seemed like, looking at the schedule, they are performing almost every single day somewhere in the city. You have theatrical performances, you have installations of sculpture. You can see some of those here on the right. You have dance performances, you have the literary arts. It is one of the most robust programs, and they learned a lot from other CETA projects across the nation. There are 3 unique characteristics to the New York City CETA program. The first being that they had a dedicated documentation unit. Many of the CETA programs did not, but in New York, they hired both photographers and writers to document all of those activities that were taking place across the city. And they, of course, then published various newspapers, brochures, books, so that they are continuously spreading the word of CETA across the community and outside of New York City as well. The other unique aspect was that they had a required payday meetup. So artists were required to go and physically pick up their paychecks in person. What that meant was that there was an opportunity to socialize and engage, to come together to discuss the various programs and projects they were implementing in their communities. Many of these artists did not have background and training in grassroots organizing, in community-led collaboration. They were doing a lot of this work on their own and learning as they went. And so the opportunity to come together, to learn from one another and collaborate was really an integral part of their success. And the third was that they had a dedicated studio day. So they were expected to be in their communities supporting their projects 4 days a week. On the 5th, they were expected to be in the studio. And so the idea that administrators and supporters of these CETA projects understood that cultivating a creative practice, supporting the artist's studio process would have a positive impact on the other work that they were doing in community was critical. The largest part of the CETA section within the exhibition is dedicated to Delaware, because Delaware had an incredibly robust CETA project. And I just have to pause for 1 second and ask if there's anyone in the audience who was employed through CETA or participating in CETA programs. It's always good to know who you're speaking to. Well, some of these might jog some memories for you all. So unsurprisingly, Delaware's CETA programs came online very early. We all know Delaware likes to be first. So remember, it's signed at the end of 1973. The first artists aren't really employed until 74. Delaware's right there in the summer of 1975. We are ready to go. The artists here are here, and CETA is a catalyst for even more activity. Now, CETA coming into Delaware and being supported by projects was absolutely, the result of the support of elected officials. Mayors like Bill McLaughlin, Thomas Maloney before him, they are supporting these activities and ensuring that the government is aligning those federal funds with artistic projects. Delaware arrives, the CETA programs, I should say, arrives with City Sights, City Sounds. This is a performance and visual art program that is, and let me just see if we have, we'll skip ahead to a few of these. This is based in downtown Wilmington primarily. So the City Sounds are musicians who are performing across the city. They're on performing on what was then the Market Street Mall. You can see some great pop-up performances, jazz musicians, there are orchestras performing. And with city sites, there are 18 murals that are created across the city of Wilmington, large scale exterior side of building murals. There's one that still exists, is at 25th and Carter on the east side in Wilmington. You can see a reference to it in the exhibition, so you can go see it in person. The CETA funds continue, and I'll get a little into greater depth in the next few slides, but I do want to note that CETA funding and artistic projects with CETA support are not occurring just in Wilmington. They're across the entire state of Delaware. So the Community Media Workshop was a CETA-funded endeavor. One program a week aired on Rollins Cable Vision, Channel 2. Sometimes I get some recognition in the crowd for Channel 2 and its programming. This was a 30-minute weekly arts and culture program. So those folks at Community Media Workshop are out documenting city sights, city sounds. They're visiting Absalom Jones Community Center. They're going to the Delaware Art Museum, and they are then sharing all of that news out with Delawareans. We also have CETA support at the University of Delaware Theater Program Stepping Stone. They are providing theatrical performances for young and adult audiences. They're employing artists like Willie Cole, who's coming down from New York, to start first as an actor and then quickly shift to graphic design when they realize just how skilled he is in that section. There are CETA artists at the Delaware Art Museum, at the Boys Clubs of Delaware, at the Girls Clubs of Delaware, at Dover Modern Maturity Center, at Hagley, at Winterthur. You all get the idea. There are CETA artists and administrators in all of your major organizations, those pillar organizations throughout Delaware. There is, not surprisingly, a lot of photography in the Citizen Artist exhibition. It's the 1970s. Photography is having a moment. Those artists are inspired by the photographers before them. They are pushing experimentation. That experimentation is supported by the University of Delaware, by the photography programs that are there, by the photography conservation program that's at the University of Delaware. At the Delaware Art Museum, we're presenting historic photography exhibitions alongside exhibitions of contemporary photography. So it really thrives at this moment, and you can see the result within the exhibition. City Sights, City Sounds transitions to bicentennial Metroscope. There are a lot of exciting names for these projects during the 1970s as well, because it's 1976 and artists are connecting their CETA funding with their bicentennial funding. And we have incredible images of how Delaware is honoring that particular moment in the 1970s. So whether it's, we have Mayor Thomas Maloney here on the right. There, of course, was a Cesar Rodney ride in Delaware during the bicentennial. And then photographers who are capturing parades in 1976. They're creating photographs that are exploring identity in that critical moment in the 1970s. These, and we have an installation image here on the right, so you can see the wide variety. Of course, we capture bicentennial fashion and, you know, folks who are celebrating at all ages, including some very young ones in colonial garb. And there are also photo essays that are being created during this time. And on the far left, as the programs transition, There are artists, photographers going directly into the schools. They're supporting educational programming. The Art Reach program, which is CETA funded at the Delaware Art Museum, when you fast forward into the 1970s, receives a major grant from the Polaroid Corporation. It gives them the opportunity to give skills to young people that using Polaroids that explore storytelling, that support empathy between young people. And at this moment in Delaware, when all of the communities are navigating desegregation, this is a strong skill and a tool for young people to be able to learn more about one another, be empathetic about one another. Dorothy and I pulled from these two legacies and brought us up to the present with the work of Julia Wiest, because we want to showcase and focus how the archive is an incredibly subjective thing. Julia Wiest was an artist in residence in New York in the Department of Records and Information Services, and in 2019. And while she was there, she went on a kind of discovery, exploratory process to discover other artists who were integrated into a governmental system and a municipal setting. And she found the unprocessed archives from New York's CETA program. And as you all might know, if an archive is unprocessed, it's essentially invisible to the general public. So the archivists might know it exists, they might not know what's inside, and certainly we, as the public users, don't really know anything about it. She wanted to bring that history forward. And what she did was create this project, Public Record, that includes all of these archival materials from New York CETA moment, as well as, here you see in the lower right-hand corner, a photograph from the New Deal period. The works of art raise questions about how an artist is identified, how we evaluate an artistic practice, and, as I said, the decisions that lead to archival material being preserved or discarded. And for us, that offers a really kind of interesting and reflective moment, we hope, for our audience.
The histories at issue here are fragile. They are in buildings that are going to be torn down or have already been torn down, or they are held in archives that actually got thrown out when somebody moved cross country 30 years ago. Or they are in a mural in the basement of the Twin Towers, in the case of one several CETA-produced murals. Or they are fundamentally, there were never records of them in the first place because they are live performance. And in Delaware, this was a particularly urgent question for me because by the numbers, there were more actually musicians hired than photographers. But we actually are very fortunate to when you walk around in Citizen Artists, you will hear the groovy sounds of a bicentennial funded concert that's not actually a CETA production, but most of the musicians that are involved are CETA funded artists in their, in another life. So we're sort of hearing these CETA musicians, but that's the only record, the only recording, audio recording of those guys that we have, and to say nothing of those guys from the 1930s. Who knows what kind of jazz they were slinging out there. But and we'll never know because it's gone. Unless one of you guys is hiding something that you want to let me know later. When Edward Loper Sr. is interviewed by the Archives of American Art in the 1960s or 70s about his participation in the Federal Art Project, he says that he created all these paintings for public buildings in Delaware that went in random government buildings. And he said at this moment in the 70s when he's talking, he says, they're all missing. Not a single one of them is where they're supposed to be.
And that's because, it's hanging in someone's office and they work in that office for a few decades and then they retire, and who's going to notice, Anyway, so we're really thrilled that we have the one painting by Edward Lober for the Federal Art Project in the show. I know there's more out there somewhere, and they're probably in Delaware, so keep your eyes peeled. But I don't know what they look like because there's not even any pictures of them. And so all of this, what we have because somebody saved it on purpose. And then they gave it to us to put it in the show. And it's really, and as we have gone through this process, it's been, frankly, there are people that we worked with in the beginning that are no longer with us. So it's like this history is sort of wants to slip through our fingers. And the urgency of having robust cultural institutions like the New York City Municipal Archives that has an artist in residence program, that's amazing. But Wilmington doesn't have anything like that. And without these types of institutions that are saving these types of things on purpose, they just disappear forever. And it makes it really hard to ever know that they ever existed.
So we hope, of course, that visitors to the exhibition are making these connections across time. And we took the opportunity to make that very apparent and to bring forward the Citizen Photographer Project to celebrate the legacies of those two moments prior where artistic creativity was seen as an essential part of a thriving community. And so, in Citizen Photographer, you will see 24 photographs that were selected by 3 Delaware photographers who led workshops across the state. Morris Brown II, who was a CETA artist, Be Proud, and Andre Wright Jr. led those workshops at 3 different partner organizations, the Teen Warehouse here in Newcastle County, the Smyrna Opera House in Kent County, and the Lewis Public Library in Sussex County, led the workshops, and then they selected those 24 photographs that you see on view. Those 24 photographs will be traveling to those 3 partner organizations over the course of the next few months. And we're excited and hopeful that visitors to the exhibition will make connections from 2026 back to 1976, all the way back to 1936.
So we'd love to take your questions in just a moment, but before that, I want to plug the Citizen Artist Summit, which is going to be the weekend after the 4th of July. An antidote, perhaps? I don't know. Where we will be bringing together scholars of New Deal history, scholars of CETA history, living CETA artists, and Delaware public officials and arts advocates. And we're going to put all of this information together in a pot and stir it around, essentially, and all talk to each other and see what we can learn. And if there's anything to do next, because this history demands to be put into practice. In the 1970s, when the New York City CETA program was being constructed, one of the people that worked on it was an academic named Francis V. O'Connor, who essentially invented the study of New Deal arts. He was the one who started looking into, hey, I think that we know who Jackson Pollock is, because before he was really famous, he was like kind of a crummy painter for the Federal Art Project. He was, and it's the way that these programs incubate talent. And it's not even necessarily that what Jackson Pollock did as a young painter for the Federal Art Project, not that that's really anything worth, going crazy about, but the fact that it set him up for success. And that, is what these programs are capable of. Francis V. O'Connor knew that and consulted on the CETA program. So this history demands to be implemented. And so we're going to figure out how to do that. Nice.
Any questions that we can answer? Yes.
So I wrote a book on the history of Wilmington's waterfront, and I got and one of the things I did is I found a trove of photographs I think the 1930s, that was showing the construction of a pipe under the Christina River. And the really wonderful photographs, they're not named by a photographer. And I'd always kind of assumed that they had hired artists to document industrial projects rather than to work as artists. And I was kind of wondering, is that a true assumption? Were artists hired to do documentation of industry, of agriculture, of building roads, of building sewer pipes under the Christina?
Definitely. Artists, well, and I guess it sort of depends on what your definition of an artist is, because in this moment, particularly in the early 20th century, a photographer, we understand a photographer in the context of being a fine artist, and that's true. And that's always been the case. You know, people are making images and so on, but also the extent to which a photographer is sort of a scientist and a technician, and so is a natural accompaniment to industry in some cases. So it's there are absolutely just scores of professional photographers who are working for federally funded projects, who are working for privately funded projects. Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, they're real professional photographers. I would call them artists. I'm not sure they would call themselves artists. And so that's where I'm starting to kind of hesitate a little bit. But absolutely no, the creating the visual record of what are we doing here is a really key part of the process of doing industry in the first place. You know, you need to be able to show what, I mean, in the context of the New Deal, it's like, what are all these federal dollars paying for in the first place? And so being able to say, look at this brand new bridge, look at this new school, look at all these dudes, you know, moving rocks or whatever. I don't know. Like visualizing the industry. Yeah, absolutely. It's a incredibly critical part. And I think that that's actually something I've seen some speculation as to why do we not know more about CETA and CETA's history? And it's in part because you don't have, you know, you have terrible branding, frankly, and the photographers create the visual information that we're able to kind of see and synthesize and understand. And we see the picture, Dorothy Lang's picture of the woman in California, and we think about starvation and we think about the Virgin Mary. You know, there's so many different associations that we can bring to that image, that like a line in a spreadsheet does not carry. So yeah,
I mean, one picture is like the 3 men being lowered in a bucket down into
oh my gosh,
down to the pipe, and the city background is there, and it's an incredibly artistic photo.
I believe it.
3 men in their work clothes being lowered, and in no OSHA. But yeah, and I just thought this is not just a normal structure. This is an artist taking this photograph. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and those photographers are many of the photographs that we understand, like historic photographs that we understand to be exceptional sort of artistic moments in American history, were created in these kind of industrial circumstances. And so those guys didn't necessarily understand themselves to be creating fine art in the same way that we experience it now. But like, yes, they were, yeah.
Yes. I guess I was curious, it sounded like during the WPA, the graphic arts component of making everything was more integrated racially and in terms of gender than some of the other artistic endeavors. Was there a specific reason for that you found in the course of research, or? It's
based, I mean, it's the easel painting divisions are the fancier jobs, and so the more prestigious jobs are going to the white men. And that's not universally the case. There's exceptions to anything you can say about the WPA. You can find an exception. But broadly speaking, the design jobs were not as there were different kind of pay scales for different artists. It could be an artist class 2, artist class 1. And so they had a really elaborate way to kind of identify who is doing what, how skilled is this person, how much do they learn on the job, or are they coming in with a huge background and stuff. And so yeah, there's like the people that are so that's why. Yes.
I'm always curious about the hierarchy of CETA. That it's like how artists chosen? You know, was it merit based or was it like in the case of the people in Buffalo you mentioned? When I always I didn't realize that they were connected with a government program because I thought they knew each other. They went to school together and they went to New York together and we're quite supportive of each other. Had nothing at all to do with some higher, you know, overlord of the arts, you know, who would say, well, that person I like.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought they did it on their own, and completely independent of you know, any kind of funding or organizations. Do you know more about that or?
Absolutely.
There's a request from Zoom for you to repeat the question.
Oh, sure.
I can hear better. They can't hear what goes in the back.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. So the question is, if I'm getting this correct, that the question is generally around the hierarchy and the structure that made these CETA programs possible. And kind of like with the New Deal, there, like we kind of speak to some generalizations regarding CETA, but there are always exceptions. It seems like across the United States, each CETA program will be slightly unique. So, for example, when we spoke with Carson Zullinger, who folks might know, local photographer, he went to an interview. He was interviewed by the CETA administrators. They evaluated the works of art that he was creating. He answered a number of questions, and then he was hired. And also, artists are finding out about CETA jobs in all sorts of interesting ways. Willie Cole reads about the University of Delaware Theater CETA program in a job listing in the New York Times. And so then he's brought all the way down here to Delaware. So they're all unique. In the case of Buffalo, it was in very, you know, in many ways, a group of friends and artists who were together. They see that this funding, CETA funding, is available, and they align it with their efforts. With the community media workshop, I'm going to forget the gentleman's last name, Weslowski.
Yes.
Ed Weslowski. He had the idea for a television program, and then he used that CETA funding to employ individuals. So it takes all different forms. Sometimes there is this kind of, you know, arts administrator who's overseeing everything, and there is much more of a hierarchy. In some cases, it is a group of artist friends who are coming together.
One other question, I'm genuinely avoid this one, but is that program completely disassembled and tossed at this stage?
Oh, great question. So the question is was the program completely disassembled and lost? Yes. So by Reagan. So in his first State of the Union, he is just critiquing CETA and every aspect of it. And then of course he brings on his own jobs training,
Partnership Act,
yes,
something like that.
I think, yeah. So he brings on his own employment program. So we don't have CETA anymore. Of course, we don't have any of the New Deal programs anymore. And throughout the exhibition, we're not necessarily making the case that we should bring the New Deal back or we should bring CETA back, because they had their failings, they had their successes. I think the hope is that we're inviting visitors to imagine what could be next. What have we learned from these two moments in time? What can we bring forward? How can we move even farther ahead in supporting artists in our society?
And I think the other key there is that neither the WPA nor CETA were arts programs. They were jobs programs, period. And the premise of both the artists in both generations is that art is a job and artists are professionals. And if we're thinking about how can, what is public works, that artists can participate in that. And there's a sort of lateral thinking also of saying, this doesn't necessarily apply to, or then, you know, the person that designed this program isn't thinking about artists, but how can I make this about artists? And I think, yeah, that's that kind of extraordinary creative thinking is at the heart of Citizen Artist.
This makes me think about the like recent efforts of like union building and the Philly Social Workers Union, architectural workers are unionizing, which is awesome. But do you know about if there's involvement of artists in the labor movement in the 30s?
Yes.
And what that crossover looked like?
So they're unionized, actually.
Repeat the question.
Sorry, the question is that given all sorts of very exciting recent news in coming out of Philadelphia particularly, but with cultural workers unionizing, what does that history look like in the 30s? And they are in unions. They're picketing the picture, the Julia Wiest picture that we had up in the bottom right-hand corner. Those are WPA artists who are protesting cuts to the WPA. And so they did the whole shebang ultimately. Yeah, they were fully organized. The artists union is a key organization in the construction of the kind of New Deal arts. They are we have some really like lovely drawings from artist union meetings, but they become, yeah, like they're at first they're just sort of a social club essentially that are calling themselves the artist union, but there is a really deliberate effort to and those guys are coming out of like Joffrey clubs and are I would say sort of actual communists and like yeah there's a the WPA guys are unionized. Yeah.
Any other questions we can answer?
One more.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. I hope you come see the exhibition.
Yeah.
And you have one more question.
Yes.